Welcome to GW Integrative Medicine, the podcast about disease prevention and health promotion from the Office of Integrative Medicine and Health at the George Washington University School of Medicine and Health Sciences.
I'm Dr. Misha Kogan, Chief Medical Officer here at GW Center for Integrative Medicine and Associate Professor of Medicine at GW.
And I'm your co-host, Janet Rodriguez, the Office's Administrative Director. Today, we're discussing older adults and psychedelics with Abbie Rosner, the author of Psychedelics and the Counterculture of Aging. I think that's a great title. Abbie is also a freelance journalist, writer, and public speaker who specializes in exposing how psychedelics and cannabis intersect with aging, specifically focusing on her own cohort, the baby boom generation.
Abbie is based out of Washington, D.C., and she has written extensively on older adults, cannabis, and psychedelics for Forbes, Double Blind, and other journals since 2018. Her new book comes out in July 2026. Welcome to GW Integrative Medicine, Abbie.
Thank you so much, Misha, and it's and Janet. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, it's a serious topic. It's a fascinating topic. I think we know that a lot of our listeners would absolutely die to listen to this. So let's dive right in. I guess let's start with very simple. This is a journey, Abbie. You listing your journey in the book, but share a little bit about this. How is the book came out?
Okay, thanks for that opening. So I'm based in DC, but I also grew up in Washington, DC. I'm a local product. Let's say I went to DC public schools. I grew up I came of age in the 1970s. And if anybody knows about that period of what the scene was like, we did a lot of drugs back then. We smoked pot, we dropped acid, we did all kind of naughty things. And so that was really, a very formative experience for me growing up. And then when I hit my 20s and I got married and I had kids, all of that ended. Like that chapter in life ended. And so, for all the decades that I was raising a family and building my career, it was basically a glass of wine, if I wanted to, alter my consciousness. And I think that experience, maybe a lot of baby boomers, my cohort will relate to that. I think it was a very common thing I've heard often. And then when I was in my 50s, my marriage was ending and my children were grown and out of the house. And I happened to rediscover pot. And I found that the experience was very different from back in the day. We used to smoke pot just because everybody did it. It was kind of just like the thing. And it used to make me kind of paranoid and uncomfortable. And now, all these years later, it's not that the pot was different, but I was different. I was much more mature. I'd been in therapy for, 1,000 hours. I had a meditation practice. So I was much more, familiar and comfortable with what was going on in my head. So when I entered it into an altered state of consciousness with cannabis, it was kind of a wonderful experience. This is, we think of these plant medicines as sacred allies. And this was very much the case. So I've thought to myself, I can't be the only baby boomer that's rediscovering a very different relationship with, this drug of my youth. And so as a writer, I thought, well, that would be an interesting project to pursue. So I ended up writing about older adults and cannabis and just asking, I'd go to dispensaries and I'd go up to the gray-haired customers and say, well, what are you buying? And what is it for? And they'd say, oh, this is for sleep. And now I don't need to take sleeping pills anymore because this is so effective. Or this is, the cream that I use for my arthritis. And, so I was really seeing that the relationship with these drugs in older life was very, substantively different. So then let's move to 2018. And it was my 60th birthday. I got copy of Michael Pollan's How to Change Your Mind for my birthday, for a birthday present. And that was really, a really pivotal moment for me. So first of all, it inspired me to grow my own psilocybin mushrooms and have a journey, the first time in 40 years. And that was a beautiful experience. But it also, when I read the book, the experiences of the clinical trials with cancer patients who got psilocybin assisted therapy and this profound shift in their anxiety over death, over their impending demise was just mind blowing for me. I just thought, that is how can you have such a simple intervention have such a profound change in something that's, our most primal of fears? And I thought, we all have it. Even if you don't have cancer, life itself is a terminal condition. So why wait until you're at death's door to have this experience? And I had read in some of the, the descriptions of the cancer patients who were having these, who were part of these trials, and they were saying, oh, if only I had this experience 10 years earlier. And that really, it just lit like a light bulb for me. And I thought, this is really, it's not just about end of life, but it's really about what can these experiences offer us in aging. And that's really what set me off on the journey to write the book that I wrote.
So, let's go straight into kind of a meat of the book. And let's start with the research. Abbie, you spent a lot of time describing various research advancements, and the book is very heavy on research. And I think it's actually a strength of it, honestly. But you position the research in a very understandable way. It's not it's a book for everybody. If you're a non-scientist listening to this, don't worry, right? Psychedelics can be very complicated scientifically, but it can also be quite simple. So what are some of the research that really shifted your attention and really dictated the creation of the book?
Well, I think that one of the reasons that I did focus on the research so much is I think there's a lot of stigma that we have to overcome. And, my generation particularly, who went through the war on drugs, we got hammered with a lot of, propaganda about psychedelics. And I think that unpacking that and getting rid of or addressing a lot of those stigmas is important. And I think through the research, that's a way to help people understand, some of the potential. It's not very much not the whole story, but at least I think it's an important part of the story. So I really go back to the early days in the 1950s when the researchers were trying to understand, like, what do we even do with these very powerful, unpredictable medicines? Like, what are they even good for? And so some of the earlier studies looked at like LSD for alcoholism, for substance abuse disorder, and that was promising. But I think, like, for me personally, the more interesting findings were when they found that they could give LSD to cancer patients, and that all of a sudden, kind of, miraculously, they became much more sanguine and relaxed about their experience. Instead of like being terrified about death, they were like, oh, well, this is the way of the world. But really, what matters the most is love, and the love of my family. And so that line of research was going pretty well until, of course, we hit the 1970s. And then, the counterculture clashed with the authorities, and the war on drugs started, and all of the research was basically shut down for almost 20 years. And it was only in the 1990s when the research was revived. And once again, the researchers picked up on this signal of the use for end of life and for treating depression. And I think that right now, what we're seeing is that all these years later, that continues to be a very strong focus of the research. And I think that, as we look at the impending, hopefully, crossing of the finish line of some of these psychedelic-based drugs, their use for depression in general and for end-of-life anxiety in particular will be one of the applications that will actually get FDA approval.
Yeah, yeah. So it's interesting. It's an interesting moment in time, right? I mean, the Trump was very clearly signaling that he's very interested in rescheduling
Right,
at least several psychedelics. I think he mentioned ibogaine and some others.
right. Well, and the Compass Pathways, psilocybin for treatment resistant depression. So,
Well, it's interesting. I actually think that what will happen is, I know we're going a little off track, but I think it's still an important topic. I think they'll reschedule some of them just quickly. Like just what happened with cannabis. You know, the cannabis got rescheduled totally out of blue. Nobody expected it. I think it'll be a very similar kind of another bomb. And then they'll figure out what to do with it. Like it seems like this administration is just doing stuff and then figuring out, well, okay, what did we just do? Okay, let's do something about that.
right.
But I mean, it will open a really important opportunity once it's descheduled and there's some legal status. I think that we're going to see a massive expansion in interest in research. But let's go back to research for a second. You know, there's a lot of interest in using psychedelics for age-related diseases specifically. And I'm going to leave that term a bit broad, right? Because it's not like aging causes diseases, but age is associated with higher risk of certain things, right? And so, you know, my main clinical interest is neurodegenerative disorders, you know, particularly Alzheimer's disease. And so, you know, there's a signal, right? So we both, Abbie, you and I, we know a principal investigator of a trial on use of psilocybin for Alzheimer's at Hopkins. Albert. Actually, Albert was on our podcast, and this was quite a while ago.
Yeah, a while ago. Maybe
You know, but you also
3
talk
years
about,
ago.
yeah, you also talk about research on LSD. And what's your total view on this topic? And not necessarily based on the research, but what you've gathered. Like you've heard of people, older adults, using these substances to try to really keep their mind sharper. What's your opinion on all this?
Well, I think that it's a kind of a broad and nuanced topic, because there's at the one aspect of it is like really what's happening with the synapses and at the neurological level. But then there's also and I think that that's the research on that is really in its infancy. I think it's really hard to reach any conclusions. Well, most of the research that's looked at, let's say, Parkinson's or Alzheimer's, they've really looked more at psychedelics for addressing the mental health issues that are surround living with that condition. So it helps you to become more, at peace with your condition instead of actually treating the condition itself. So I think that's one point. But this is, this topic and this question invites us to look at, on the one hand, the medical model, which is, the what are the illnesses of older age, but also psychedelics really address the kind of the wellness of older life, of how do we deepen our relationship with ourselves and the experience of older life, and what I call the conscious aging movement. So that to me is like really one of the more promising areas for what I see psychedelics in what I call the counterculture of aging.
You know, I personally feel that I think people who use psychedelics intentively and smartly, not in any form of abuse, not as a substitute for, not as an escape, but as real, you know, as you point out, go in, don't go, sort of go into the experience, get it fully. And when they do this in appropriate settings, with a healthy frequency, not overdoing it, I predict that we will end up seeing substantial protective mechanism against neurodegenerative disorders. I'm not afraid of saying that. The reason is it's twofold. One, we know that all these substances boost BDNF, and they boost BDNF dramatically. So, like, even microdosing of LSD, the data on boosting of BDNF has been around for a long time, for like 20 plus years. So the signals are all there. Some of them are super strong, but I think the bigger issue is a little bit different. The bigger issue is that the people who go this far, people who explore and they open other realms of their psyche where they find different interests, where they find engagement, where they find deeper meaning. And
Right.
I think we know that this deeper meaning, this way of saying, look, there's more than just to go to work and retire. And,
Mhm.
I think the substances are inherently helping us to truly find those core pieces of life.
Mhm.
And I think people who are, and maybe it's a bias, right? Simply maybe that the people are drawn to the substances because they drawn to the substances, this happens. Anything to reflect?
Yeah, I do actually have a lot to reply. First of all, I want to say that that this is the difference between tripping on acid back in the day and going to a concert and intentional psychedelic use. And, after living decades of life and experiencing loss and grief and illness and all the things that older adults experience, when you go back to these medicines in older life, you're much more intentional. You're much more risk averse. You're thinking about, doing your due diligence, checking with your doctor or your healthcare professionals to see, is this safe for me to do? So it's not something that we do like randomly. So I think that the intentional aspect of it really does speak to the gravity of these experiences. These can be very, very profound and even life transforming. And when like you mentioned earlier about, you retire and let's say you're dealing with health issues or whatever. And it's tempting to go into a like kind of believe in those stories are everything, and then when you have a consciousness expanding experience, you realize that you are way more than just your stories and way more than just your illness or whatever, that there's something much larger out there that you're actually even a part of. And I think that having those experiences under the proper conditions can really be a life transforming gift in older age.
So, what do you think is the future here? I mean, I think the population's getting older, right? I mean, I think the psychedelics are becoming, I don't know, there's like every issue of a major magazine, there's something, right? I mean, they're becoming almost like a table discussion in
Right.
many circles, right? So, what do you think the future here? I mean, we're all expecting growth, we're all expecting expansion. How do you think this is going to affect,
Well,
your generation in longer run, like not
right.
today, but over the next 10 years?
Great question. And I really feel like we're at a historic moment right now. The boomer generation, we had an encounter with psychedelics 50 years ago, and it was what it was. And we all, went off into our own corners, lived our lives, and, 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 had our maturing experiences. And in the meantime, the psychedelic space had its moment, became mature, went through the clinical trials, and now we're seeing this historic meeting up once again. We're more prepared, they're more prepared, and I think that all the circumstances are falling into place for psychedelic experiences to become a very meaningful part of our existence. So of our experience of aging. So that's kind of in a nutshell the way I see it. And in terms of legality, a lot of older adults want to access these experiences and they don't want to break the law, and that's absolutely understandable. And what we're seeing is that there's two states now, Oregon and Colorado. Both of them offer state legal regulated psilocybin experiences. You can go to a service center and have a facilitated psilocybin experience. You'll be screened first to make sure that there's no contraindication with your medications that you're taking, and that you're able to have an experience like this. You'll work with the facilitator to prepare so that you're mentally prepared, that you feel secure and trusting enough to go into this experience. And then you have the experience, and then you have an integration experience afterwards, all completely legal, state legal. And I think that more and more, I know more and more states, even Maryland, are looking at what's happening in Oregon and Colorado and saying we want to offer this for our constituents. And I think that this is going to become more and more available. And this is in parallel to what's happening with the FDA approval of medicines. They're two different tracks. And I think that I think it's much easier for older adults who want to have these experiences, but want to do they don't want to navigate the underground. They don't want to take any risks. And this is a way to actually access these experiences in a safe and meaningful way.
Abbie, is there a website that people could go to so they could keep track of what was going legislatively, state by state, or?
Well, yes, there's a guy, Josh Hardman. He has a site called Psychedelic Alpha, and he writes all about legislative stuff and investment stuff. It's a little, you're going into the weeds there, but so to speak. But
Pun intended.
But anyway, yeah, the information is out there for sure.
Good. I mean, where we are right now with psychedelics sort of reminds me of when I was diagnosed with breast cancer in 2003. And, all my friends couldn't wait to, give me pot just in case, I had trouble eating. But of course, I didn't have any trouble eating. I didn't have that much nausea either. But yeah, it seems like that's where we are now, where people are going to use it. So,
right. Well, I would say to older adults, if you're thinking about using it, do your homework. Check and make sure that the medications that you take are going to be consistent with the medicine that you choose. So there's a lot of due diligence, and I write about that in my book. So it really is, it's a different ball game than when we, back in the day, and and we have considerations that we need to take. That said, my whole theory here, my whole point is that I do believe that these these can be really important supportive experiences for what I call the psycho-spiritual work of aging.
And, I think I completely agree with you in terms of safety issues. There are some. But, as a geriatrician, my position is a little different. I'm dealing with the people taking, soup of toxic medications every day. And,
this is true.
And, if you look at sort of the standard toxicity scales and you compare all psychedelics, even things that are stimulating like MDMA and ibogaine, when you do these things in a controlled, appropriate way, those risks are really small, relatively speaking. We prescribe people medications that we know the risk is so high. We still prescribe it. I mean, we sit down and we talk to them about this risk. To me, this field is not any different. If you disclose the risks appropriate, if you safeguard for them, I think utilization of this substances is going to be profoundly beneficial. To prove my point, I don't want to read a little piece from one of the cases. So this is in, I think, I forgot what the chapter it is, but it's
from my book.
Yeah, from your book where you specifically go from like one case to the next. So this is from a case of the woman in her 60s. Her name is Sasha. And she tells this story how, her kids drag her to the Burning Man. Well, didn't drag her. She really wanted to go.
Yeah, she wanted to go very badly.
But the point here was really profound. And I just want to give listeners a glimpse of a possibility, because sometimes we're just kind of the fear tactics, and also just the fact that often we think of the substances as, oh my God, this is such a deep experience. I have to do this and then this and that. But I just want to read a little bit of a piece of how she practically uses and what it gives to her. And it doesn't matter what the prelude to this. I'm just going to read a couple of paragraphs. We were walking through the woods and we sat down on a log, and for about 3 hours we just talked. So she's talking about taking MDMA.
With her daughter.
I really opened up to her about a lot of stuff, and she opened up to me about a lot of stuff, what had happened with her father and so forth and so on. And a lot of healing took place. Then we came back, I watched whatever. So since then, here's another piece. So first piece is that when she started taking it first time, when she took it, it looks like it really brought her closer to the family. There was this intergenerational healing of the different traumas within not just her, but also her relationship with her daughter. But then, listen to this. Since then, I've done MDMA quite a few times. I love MDMA just because it takes all the pains away. For about 7 or 8 hours, their arthritis joints that hurt don't hurt anymore. What a gift. So, and of course we know MDMA is not a analgesic. What this means is that the psyche benefit, that there's this sense of wellness for a few hours is so profound that it just outcrowds all the suffering in the background. And it gives you this capacity to move forward and say, look, I can have that. And if I do this safely, there is very little cost, if you don't do this every day. The substances are need to be dosed at the particular periods with good breaks in between, with a good support and good recovery given. But just reading that, imagine you have a tool that for a little bit can give you a respite and do it in a very meaningful way. It's not just, well, I'm high or whatever. It's also a deeper connection. It's a deeper sense of being present to others. You heard her description of her conversation with her daughter.
Right. Well, I just want to add to that one of the beauties of these medicines, particularly when you do them in a group, is that they build community. And this is one of the things, of course, that we know that older adults are really, that will become incredibly important for older adults is the connection with others. And, there was a study recently that where they looked at people who were going to have a psychedelic experience, and they interviewed them before the experience and after the experience. They were going to go to ceremonies. They were, people of all ages. And then they divided the people under 60 and the people over 60. And they looked at, what was the change, before and after. And in the younger cohort, the change was really they all registers an improvement in their wellness. But in the younger cohort, the wellness was associated with the intensity of the psychedelic experience. And with the older cohort, the change in wellness was associated with their experience of communitas, of the collective, of the being with the other people, that connection. That was what was really the most powerful and instrumental in their change and well-being. And I heard that over and over again in the people that I interviewed for the book, that this experience of connection, of love to strangers, to people that you're with in ceremony that you didn't even know before. And you come out of it and you're, something has shifted in you. You no longer in your own little, world. You've connected in a meaningful way to others. And that's just a beautiful thing in any time in life, but certainly in older life.
Okay, that just made me very emotional. But
it's emotional. I agree.
And it sounds like a very beautiful experience. Before we let you go,
okay,
please let me know let us know where our listeners can find you on the interweb, and tell us what you have going on in the future that they should know about.
Okay, thanks, Janet. So I have a website, www.abbierosner.com. That's ABBIEROSNER.com. And you'll find on my website, there's information about how to order my book, and it's officially coming out in July, but it's actually already delivering if you order.
Oh, really?
Yeah, if you order it directly from the publisher, they're sending them out. Somebody wrote to me and said, "Oh, I'm enjoying your book." I was like, "How did you even get it?" But the publisher is already sending them out. But anyway, July 7th is coming out. I also write a Substack newsletter about psychedelics in older life.
That's free, folks. It's free.
It's free. I'm not in this for the money. And so you can sign up for that. And also on July 7th at 7 p.m. I'm going to be at Busboys and Poets in Tacoma Park doing my book launch. And I'll be in conversation with Dr. Misha Kogan.
I'll be there.
Yeah. So anyway, so
we'll
Brilliant.
continue this chatting because I
yes.
have a lot more questions. It's just
Oh,
Janet was like, okay, we got to finish off for today.
yes,
But I
we
have a
could
lot more.
talk. We could talk all day, I'm sure, about
Well,
this. So anyway, so that's how you and feel free to reach out. I'd love to hear from people.
especially after you've read the book, y'all.
Yes.
I already see that we need to bring Abbie back and maybe
Yep.
bring other folks on and for you guys to have more conversations because this is a really
Let me
fascinating,
think about this. I'm
impactful topic.
thinking, we should organize a panel. I think we also need to think about, one of the next symposiums we need to do. I think this needs to be a topic.
Hey, we could.
It's a biggie.
Always.
It's a biggie.
Yes.
There are millions of baby boomers growing old and going, what the?
Exactly. Yeah. Well, thanks for sitting down with us, Abbie. Thank you so much. I'm Dr. Misha Kogan.
And I'm Janet Rodriguez. This is the GW Integrative Medicine podcast from the GW Office of Integrative Medicine and Health.
Thanks for
Yeah.
listening. We'll see you all soon. Stay healthy. Stay dry. It's raining.